Welcome to our presentation. My name is Isaiah,
And I'm Mark.
and today we'll be discussing Alan Turing, and specifically how he helped to crack the Enigma machine during World War II. Mark and I are both interested in Alan Turing because we have connections to computer science, and we always hear his name cropping up in different places. Alan Turing was an English mathematician, and like I said earlier, he's known by many to be the godfather of computer science. He went on to publish a lot of important papers that others used in creating the first modern computers. But what we'll be discussing today is the machine he created during World War II that helped to crack the Enigma code and resulting in an Allied victory.
And so in order to understand what Alan Turing did, we have to understand what the Enigma machine was and what he was working with. And so what it was a publicly available encryption device that the German military took and added more rotor options to and added a plug board to make it even more difficult to crack the encryption on. And essentially what it is a substitution cipher that changes after each letter that's input into the device. And so what a German officer would do would take a message and type in that message. And every time a letter was pressed down on the Enigma machine, it would go through all of the swapping and through all the rotors and light up a different letter on the board. And then somebody else would write down whatever letter lights up, and that would give you the encrypted message. And so to decrypt it, the person receiving the message would have to have their Enigma machine set to the exact same settings as the person who encrypted the message. And then that person would take the encrypted message and type out each letter. And every time they press down one of the encrypted letters, it would light up the decrypted letter. And if you did that with every letter, it would give you the decrypted message that the other officer had sent. And so on the inside of the Enigma machine, you had 3 rotors that would encrypt, and the Germans had 5 of these rotors in total. So you would pick 3 out of the 5, and order did matter because each rotor would encrypt in a different way. So if you swap the rotors around, it would change the encryption. And then each rotor would also have 26 different settings on it, which gave you even more encryption to choose from. And then there was also a plug board on the front of the Enigma machine that would connect 10 pairs of letters to each other, and out of the 26 letters of the alphabet. So you can go ahead and pause the video here and see if you can figure out just how many possible combinations all those different settings would give you. And so if you got this number, then congratulations, you're the winner. And what we have here is 5 times 4 times 3 is the number of ways you can pick the 3 rotors out of the 5 that are given to you. And then the 26 times 26 times 26 is the number of ways you can set those 3 rotors to different settings. And then the 26 factorial divided by 6 factorial, 10 factorial, and 2 to the 10th is the number of ways you can select 10 pairs of letters from the 26 letters of the alphabet. And multiplying all these together, combining all these different settings, you get 158 quintillion, 962 quadrillion, 555 trillion, 217 billion, 826,360,000 possible combinations. And so one Enigma machine could create that many different encryptions from one machine. And so for the Allies to be able to crack an Enigma machine code using brute force, they would have to go through 159 quintillion different settings to try to figure out what the code is, which is not effective. So I'm going to let Isaiah tell you how they did that effectively.
All right, so a couple of things were needed before we could attempt to crack the Enigma code. Firstly was a stolen Navy Enigma machine. So we needed a version of the Enigma machine that the German military used to be able to understand how it worked. We also needed to be able to understand German communication tendencies, because a major strategy in cryptography and code breaking is coming up with common phrases or cribs that commonly appear in the ciphertext. So a common one that was used for the Germans was weather report, because they were always telling their troops what the weather was going to be like. So if you look in the code, you can try to find places that the word weather report could appear, because you know that's going to be in there somewhere. So this was Alan Turing's solution to the problem. He was into machines, and this was probably his finest one. He created a machine called the bomb that was used to run through possible configurations of the Enigma initial settings. Now, the bomb did some pretty special things that allowed it to not run through all of the possible combinations, and we'll talk about some of those later. But what the bomb is it's basically just a whole bunch of Enigma rotors and then a whole bunch of wires behind those that you can't see that allow it to do some pretty special time-saving things. And a machine or some technique with some speed was necessary for this problem because the Germans changed their code settings every day. So the Allies cannot just sit back and take their time cracking the code. So another thing that was necessary in cracking the Enigma code was that the Enigma machines were kind of flawed. Their fatal flaw was that they could never encode a single letter to itself. So for instance, the letter A could never encode to itself A. So if I take an Enigma machine and I just keep pounding the A key over and over and over, it's going to produce a whole bunch of gibberish, but it'll never produce an A. So combining this with cribs, we can try to look for places in this gibberish code that the keyword weather could be at. So in the first example, you can see that weather cannot be the first 7 words or 7 letters of the code because these A's line up, and we know that an A can never encode to itself. If you look down at the second line, you can see that weather could possibly be in spots 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And this is the foundation of what the bomb machine used. The bomb machines were set up by cribs for people, by people. And what the bomb machines did was they would run through each of the different rotor settings. And for each of the rotor settings, they would conjecture or just like guess a plug board setting. And by guessing a plug board setting, they were able to figure out what other plug board settings would have to be based on their first guess. And so they would do this until they arrived at a contradiction. So if they initially assumed that A and B were connected on the plug board, and then they did some more findings, and they later decided that B and D were also had to be connected on the plug board, this would be a contradiction because only 2 letters at a time can be connected on the plug board. So the bomb machine would throw this out and it would continue on. So the bomb machine did all of this with logic circuits because we're in a time before computers. And it would run through all the possible configurations of the rotors. And once we were done, it would have possible settings for the Enigma machine that didn't arrive at any contradictions. And people would have to take these possible configurations and check them by hand to see which ones translated the code correctly.
In conclusion, this is one way that math quite literally saved the world from the German army. And unfortunately, it's something that Alan Turing was not recognized for until much later because it had to be kept a secret that they had cracked the German code. Otherwise, the Germans would use a different code. But Alan Turing is recognized for it now, and he actually accomplished a lot more in his life and a lot of very interesting things, which if you're interested in knowing more about Alan Turing and more of the stuff that he did, you can go and do research into that and find all kinds of stuff.